Hey everyone, tonight we're re-diving into the unforgettable lives and harsh realities of brothel boys in the Qing Dynasty. Before we settle in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy this kind of content. And drop a comment, letting me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I always find it fascinating to see the mix of people joining us from across the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe switch on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's step into tonight's journey together. You arrive in the world somewhere between a pile of rice husks and a weary sigh. Probably in a back alley of Jianan, though no one bothered to write it down. Your mother calls you her little treasure, but one that costs more to keep than it's worth. As the third son, Qing Dynasty economics places you just above the family goat and a notch below the water bucket. Food is scarce, attention even scarcer. Your eldest brother is being prepared to inherit the only real family livelihood, maybe chopping wood or collecting taxes, whichever pays less. Your second brother is the backup plan. Q, meanwhile, our options C as in, can we sell him to Madame Sheng before puberty arrives? You happen to be handsome. That isn't your fault. Long lashes, soft skin, and sloping shoulders that look poetically tragic. When a silk-clad woman comes to inspect the neighborhood children, you're presented like produce at market. She nods, satisfied, and presses a pouch of coins into your father's hands. Small, but more than you'd ever earn hauling vegetables. Suddenly, you're told how fortunate you are. You're going to the city. You'll wear silk. You'll live in a refined establishment. You don't know what that means, but your mother weeps, and your father suddenly finds the energy to repaint the front door. They rename you before you even arrive, something like Little Plum or Fragrant Breeze. Your old name is discarded, along with your opinions and food preferences. You ask if you'll come back, okay? They say yes, too quickly. You're 9 years old, and you almost believe them. The road to the brothel is long, silent, and smells faintly of mildew and regret. By the time the city gates open and you see the lacquer building glowing with red lanterns and suspiciously cheerful music, you already know the truth. You've been sold. Not apprenticed, not adopted. Sold, like a decent pig or a pair of boots. And the worst part, you're about to learn how to smile about it. The brothel greets you with the enthusiasm of a damp towel. The house is colorful, perfumed with incense, and dripping with overcompensation. A maidor, perhaps a prison guard with a nicer posture, shows you inside and begins the makeover. First, your clothes vanish, not folded, not stored, gone. You're given something tighter, silkier, scented with things you don't recognize. You feel like a dumpling wrapped in bad decisions. Then comes the bath. Not a gentle soak, but an interrogation by boiling water and a loofah wielded like a weapon. Okay? She scrubs as if you owe her silver. Hair washed, skin stripped, nails trimmed. Dignity rinsed away. Perfume follows poured, not dabbed. You reek like a flower shop that lost a fight with the spice rack. Natural scent clearly isn't in the job description. From now on, you're expected to smell of peach blossoms, powdered moonlight, and whatever masculine charm is when it comes in a bottle that burns the eyes. Next, etiquette training. Smile but not too wide. Walk gracefully but not like a dancer. Speak poetically but not like a scholar. Nobody wants to be outshone by their own wine pour. You're drilled in, kneeling, serving tea, and pretending interest when someone recounts their exam scores from 20 years ago. Less education, more acting lessons for a career in exquisite pretending. One of the older boys, work named Whispering Bamboo, pulls you aside. He gives you the real rules. Flatter them, feed them, never correct their verses. And if they ask you to sing for the ancestors' sake, don't outsing them. You want to ask if it gets easier. He just stares and says, you'll get used to it. Spoiler, you won't. Training begins the moment you can stand without dripping sandalwood oil. Posture lessons first. Apparently, you've been walking wrong your whole life. You're told to glide, not stump float, like poetry, says the madam. You try. You look more like a goose that drank too much wine. She mutters about peasants with oxen ankles. Next, voice lessons. It's too loud, too flat, too honest. They want a tone halfway between apology and seduction. You practice lines like, honored guest, your presence shines brighter than the moon over West Lake, while fighting the urge to laugh. Nearly bust a rib, holding it in. Poetry is next, not writing it, just memorizing and reciting with feeling. You have no idea what jade fragrance dances with spring wind means. But apparently, it makes old men nostalgic, which helps loosen purses. Then comes music. You pluck the pipa badly enough to make your teacher cry, not from beauty, but from pain. You also pick up the flute, because nothing says, please tip me, like a child playing breathy tunes with dead eyes. Wine service follows. Pour without spilling, refill without asking. Keep the wrists soft and elegant. They say the right flick can earn you a silver tail. Do you try? You splash wine on someone's lap and nearly get reassigned to dish duty. Finally, smiling, the most valuable skill. Not too toothy, not too sly. It's just enough to say, I'm endlessly charmed by you. Please keep paying for my rice. You practice in the mirror. You terrify yourself. By day's end, your legs throb. Your head swims with Qing Dynasty metaphors, and your soul clings to a bamboo flute for dear life. Congratulations, you're officially in training, whatever that means. Weeks pass in rehearsals, posture drills, poetry about chrysanthemums, flute solos no one asked for, but none of it prepares you for the clients. They arrive in droves, midlife crises in silk robes, merchants who fancy themselves poets, and one man who insists he met the emperor's cousin. Twice, Madame Xiang, part-time businesswoman, part-time demon in pearls, lines you and the others up for inspection. Fans in hand, you're expected to look both innocent and slightly available. You resemble a hostage auditioning for a tea commercial. The first customer points at you. That one, he grunts as if ordering duck. You're led to a private room filled with faded wall scrolls and the smell of dumplings. He sits. You kneel. He talks. You nod. He talks more. You nod again. It's like theater, without the meaning, but with extra foot sweat. He recites bad poetry. Your beauty, like spring rain, drips into my heart. It comes out more like a plumbing issue. You murmur admiration, pours wine, and promise yourself you'll scream into a pillow later. The night drags. You refill his cup, inflate his ego, and pretend to laugh at his tax ledger jokes. He pats your shoulder and calls you graceful. You smile. A tiny, worked. A tiny, sort of. You pretend it's a compliment and not a warning sign. Eventually, he leaves, not because he's satisfied, but because he's out of silver. You bow politely as he stumbles out, then collapse into the nearest chair like a puppet whose strings have been cut. Whispering bamboo pats you on the back. It's not bad for your first time, he says. He only tried to touch your hair. Could have been worse. You blink. That was good. But no one asks, what do you think? You're now officially one of them. A brothel boy in the House of Blossoms. A performer in a theater of illusions. A peach. Scented. Ghost haunting other people's fantasies. And this was just the easy customer. You thought pouring tea would be the easy part. How hard could it be to tip a pot and not spill? It turns out, in Qing Dynasty Brothel, everything is performance, even tea. Before the evening starts, you're briefed on the sacred ritual of the tea set. Each item has meaning. Each gesture is calibrated to charm, beguile, and subtly distract your guest from the fact that he's spending his savings on fermented leaves and forced compliments. You practice for hours, holding the teapot by the tail, like a swan's neck, pouring in long, elegant streams without looking and smiling. Always smiling, even when the steam scalds your wrist and you've made eye contact with your reflection in the cup and questioned all your life choices. The first real client tonight is a scholar. At least, he says he's a scholar. He wears a lot of ink stains and quotes Confucius with the enthusiasm of a man hoping it makes up for his breath. You kneel, you smile, you pour. Such grace, he says, watching you tilt the pot like a crane at dawn. You nearly laugh, but you hold it in, because now it's time for flirtation. It's the most ambiguous battlefield in the brothel world. You're instructed to be playful, but distant, warm, but unattainable, and alluring, yet innocent. In other words, a cat but with better posture. So you begin. You compliment his poem, which references plum blossoms and loneliness. You tilt your head slightly, widen your eyes, a classic brothel trick. He looks at you like you've just validated his entire literary career. He giggles. You refilled his cup. He leans in. You lean back just enough to make it seem deliberate, not defensive. He sighs, sips, and begins to tell you about his youth, his dreams, and his complex relationship with his mother. You nod empathetically while mentally counting tea leaves and wondering if your peeper string is still broken. By the end of the evening, he leaves lighter in wallet and heavier in self-worth. You've smiled so long, your cheeks hurt, but congratulations, you've successfully executed a flawless round of strategic tea seduction. You'll do it again tomorrow and the day after that until you die or marry rich, whichever comes first. By now, you've mastered the smile, the tea pour, the subtle art of pretending to care about a man's calligraphy. But even with all your charm, you're still a nobody. Because in the brothel, hierarchy is sacred, and you're currently positioned just slightly above the chamber potboy and slightly below the cat. At the top is Madame Shang, supreme ruler of the House of Blossoms. She doesn't walk, she floats, trailing perfume and judgment. Her word is law. Her fan is sharper than most daggers. She taps it twice, someone's career ends. She taps it thrice, someone disappears entirely. Then there's Whispering Bamboo, the senior boy. He's been here since the Kangxi Emperor still had black hair, elegant, sly, and dangerously good with the flute. He can make men cry with a poem or open their coin purses with a wink. He says things like, "We are instruments of fantasy, darling," and makes it sound profound. He has his own room, his own clientele, and most enviably, he no longer has to pour tea for drunk butchers from Shandong. Beneath him are the established boys, each with their own specialties. Night Lotus does erotic riddles. Jade Cricket sings falsetto opera. Red Pony has an actual fan club of Paul, retired generals, preferred clients, and corner seats at mealtime. They also have egos the size of palace roofs. You're a new blossom. Translation: cheap, replaceable, and mostly here to look pretty, while being told what to do by boys wearing more makeup than you. You sleep in a shared room with 5 others, bathe last, and get the leftovers from the dumpling tray. If you're lucky, you might get assigned to pour wine for one of the lesser merchants, the ones who tip in compliments and coughs. Of course, below you are the runners and scrubbers, boys who haven't yet proven they can string 3 flirty sentences together. They fetch towels, heat, water, and get blamed for everything from broken teacups to awkward silences. The hierarchy is strict, and any attempt to jump it is punished. Whisper too loudly about Madame Shang's wig glue. Your scrubbing chamber pots accidentally outperform a senior boy. Congratulations, you now serve his tea. In this world, survival isn't about beauty, it's about knowing your place, staying in your lane, and pretending you love it there. You used to think glamour meant silk robes, perfumed hair, and dreamy looks over a lantern light. A magical life, right? Krong. Turns out, glamour is expensive. Not just in money, though you are not seeing much of that either, but in time, dignity, and alarming quantities of goose fat. Your morning routine starts before sunrise, before roosters, before your soul is even awake. You stumble to the bathing room where cold water awaits like an ambush. Hot water is for clients. You meanwhile get the luxury of shivering while washing off the faint smell of yesterday's powdered humiliation. Then comes makeup, a process that requires 2 mirrors, 3 arguments, and a steady hand. Your face must be painted to perfection. Porcelain skin, blood-red lips, eyebrows shaped like willow leaves, and disappointment. A single smudge and Madame Shank will appear from the shadows like an angry ghost. Your hair, a battlefield of pins, wax, and hairpieces. It's sculpted into a shape that defies physics and occasionally balance. Can't lie down properly, can't scratch your scalp, and birds now regard your head as potential nesting real estate. Then there's wardrobe, silk robes so delicate they tear at you. Breathe wrong, crowd of sashes that cut off circulation, slippers made for someone with half your foot size and none of your daily mileage. All of it looks glorious under the lanterns until you realize it takes 3 people to help you go to the toilet. Of course, you're expected to maintain this look for hours. You can't sweat, sneeze, or frown too hard. You are a painting, a fantasy, a fragile illusion made of rice, powder, and lies. Meanwhile, the clients assume you just wake up like this. They sip tea, compliment your skin, and ask if you're naturally graceful, if you want to tell. Damn, it's the 3rd corset layer, keeping you upright, but instead, you giggle and pour more tea. At night, you finally peel off the layers, wipe off the lacquered face, and stare into the mirror. You look young, tired, real. For a moment, you remember your actual self, the boy behind the silk and the smile. And then you go to bed knowing tomorrow you'll do it all again. Because beauty isn't effortless, it's just heavily curated suffering, okay? By now, you've learned that the brothel is not just a place of business. It's a theater, a battleground, a fashion show, and occasionally a soup kitchen for emotionally needy officials. But it's also a place of rules. Strange, specific, and occasionally enforced by a man holding a rooster feather fan. Teach, which brings us to the forbidden ones. There are clients you're allowed to charm, merchants, scholars, retired soldiers with coin and cataracts. And then there are the off-limits elite, the ones who enter through the back door, never give their names, and are followed by guards who look like they bite. Your instructions are clear. Don't make eye contact. Don't flirt. Don't speak unless spoken to, and even then, don't be interesting. Naturally, the forbidden ones are the most curious of all. High-ranking eunuchs, royal cousins, court officials with secrets leaking out of their sleeves. They don't come here for tea. They come here for control and to be adored without complication. They pick their favorites. Sometimes it's the brooding flute player. Sometimes it's the quiet boy with moonbeam skin. Once disturbingly, it was the kitchen boy who sings to ducks. If you're chosen by one, your life changes overnight. You get better food, softer robes, private quarters, and the unspoken understanding that you now belong to someone. Some boys call it a blessing. Others call it a polite kind of prison. You see it play out one evening, a forbidden one. Let's call him Minister Black Robe, chooses whispering bamboo. One evening, he's sipping plum wine, quoting verses, and leaving lotus petals in your teacup. The next, he's gone. No warning, no farewell, just a single blossom on his pillow, like something out of a sorrowful play. The whole house falls quiet for days. You take away 2 lessons. First, everyone can be replaced. Second, the powerful ones don't bother with goodbyes. Sometimes, whispers drift through the corridors about boys who managed to flee. One supposedly vanished with a wealthy lady. Another faked his death with pig's blood. Another shaved his head and slipped into a monastery as a mute novice. Every version ends the same, and he was never seen again, which, here, almost counts as a victory. So, you keep your head bowed. You smile the right amount. You stay ordinary because shining too brightly in this place can make you disappear, and not in a poetic way. You've poured the tea. You've laughed at mediocre poetry. You've somehow survived a week in silk socks while the monsoon turned everything to soup. But tonight, the curtain shifts a soft sign that the show is moving to its next stage, the private act. Fewer props, no audience, and expectations of a different sort. You step behind it, not out of desire, but because refusal would be both rude and possibly career-ending. The chamber is overheated. Scents of oil drift in the air like deceit. A client sprawls on silk cushions, grinning with all the subtlety of a fox staring down a chicken coop. What takes place behind that curtain is never written into rules. It lives only in rumor, whispered over laundry baskets, half caution, half gossip. Here you stop being a performer. You become a reflection, a vessel for fantasy. He doesn't want you, he wants the version of you that laughs on cue, gasps on script, and pretends his joke about duck guts is the height of wit. Sometimes it's harmless talk. Sometimes you sing. Sometimes you hold a hand and feign wisdom you don't possess. But sometimes it's more. And when it is, there's choreography. The careful slipping of robes, the staged breath, the balancing act between allure and survival. You become artist, diplomat, and acrobat of feeling. Your thoughts wander elsewhere home. Food, the sound of rain on tile rooftops, anything that makes the moment lighter. Some clients are gentle. They ask after you, treat you carefully, leave coins without haggling. Others use you like furniture, something soft, quiet, and replaceable. But no matter what occurs, when the curtain parts again, you must emerge, polished, smiling, untouchable, as though nothing inside you cracked. The other boys catch your eyes, give a slight nod. They've been there. They'll be there again. Straighten your robe, touch up your powder, and step back into the glow. Because here, it's all illusion. And that thin curtain exists solely to keep reality locked away. You live in one of the busiest pleasure houses in the Qing Dynasty, yet your favorite pastime is imagining you live anywhere else. And you're not alone. Every boy keeps a secret life, if only inside his head. Reality is sore feet, incense headaches, and pretending to enjoy a tax official's drunken rambling. But in your imagination, you're free, wealthy, adored, married perhaps to someone whose brow never drips sweat over tea. Your escapes begin in stolen moments, eyes closed between clients. You dream of drifting down the Yangtze, plucking a goukin beneath moonlight. Running a tea shop where the biggest crisis is a spilled cup, not a weeping official in your lap. Some dream of opera stages, others of noble lovers, whispering bamboo. Ever the dreamer fancies a lady with a horse and no questions about his past. Your dream is simpler, a bed of your own, a warm bowl of rice, and never again smearing rouge on your neck. But you know, dreams are not escape plans. Real flight is rare, and when it happens, it becomes legend. One boy faked a fit during a dance, leaped through a window, swam across the koi pondali to be dragged back by Madame Sheng herself, brandishing a soup ladle like a weapon. He now scrubs clothes for life. So instead, you carve out smaller freedoms, stolen nap in storage, a whispered joke behind a fan, a half-hummed song of home. In a place where every gesture is staged, imagination becomes the only possession that is truly yours. You keep it polished in your mind, like jade. You cling to it when the curtain falls, the guest leaves, and you are once more only a painted boy, too young to carry so much longing. Maybe one day, fantasy will turn into memory. Until then, you keep dreaming because that costs nothing. And yet, you've grown accustomed to the flicker of lanterns, clinking of cups, the rustle of silk, and the quiet heartbreak of someone weeping over a lost hairpin in the bathhouse. Just another Tuesday till the outsiders come. Not clients, those you can manage. These are different. Travelers, scholars, missionaries, strangers who walk with entitlement, who study your world like it's a chapter in a scandalous book they later pretend not to own. Some come to observe, sketching furniture, gestures, even your eyelashes in neat notebooks. They sigh over your posture, your painted lips, your fluid tea pour, as if you were a rare bird, not a person with blisters and no privacy. Some come to rescue, armed with pamphlets, sermons, and judgments. They call your life immoral, as though that word could wrap around poverty, power, and duty, tidy as a dumpling. The worst are the romantics. They find art in your fatigue, poetry in your sacrifices. They sit on cushions, eating dumplings, you're forbidden, while praising the noble beauty of your suffering. Sometimes they even ask, "Do you like it here?" And you smile. Of course you do. Who wouldn't enjoy endless performance, emotional labor, and the occasional brush with disease? You've learned to perform not just for patrons, but for their gaze. The gaze that freezes you into something fragile, tragic, and mute. Yet inside, you want to shout, "I'm not a figure in your diary, not a side note in your thesis, not your fantasy. I am me," but you never say it. You bow, you smile, and return to work. Survival here is all about knowing which parts of yourself to conceal and which to sell. Every so often, a boy simply disappears. No letters, no farewell songs. Last night, he was beside you, dusting rice powder, cursing a client's garlic breath. This morning, his mat is bare, his comb gone, the faint trace of plum oil lingering in the air. The official explanation is always the same. He was sent to another house. A neat phrase, like a promotion. But no one ever sees him again. At first, it unsettles you, okay? Then it becomes as routine as rain, as ordinary as athlete's foot. You mark it with a nod, maybe whisper, "He deserved better," then move on, because the clients expect a new tune, and the show must go on. Rumors thrive in this silence. Some say the boy ran away, slipped through the roof tiles, disguised as a noodle vendor, living free under the stars. Others say he was sold to a more exclusive establishment, where the pillows are softer and the rules are worse. Then there are darker whispers. Illness, punishment, or simply not earning enough to be worth the rice. He was fed. No one speaks these things out loud. In this business, imagination is currency, and reality is best kept in storage with the old costumes and broken fans. Still, you remember them, the way Lotus used to hum off-key when he was nervous. How little dear always braided his own hair because he didn't trust anyone else's fingers. How you once shared a stolen dumpling with Plum Blossom behind the courtyard wall and pretended it was a banquet. Now, there are names you don't dare say aloud. You carry them quietly like hidden bruises, reminders that this life has rules, and one of them is that not everyone finishes the act. You begin to rehearse your own disappearance, just in case. A mental map of the alleyways. A coin hidden in a shoe. An imagined version of yourself who gets out and grows old and forgets what it felt like to sleep beneath a silk canopy with your heart clenched like a fist. But until that day, if it ever comes, you paint your face, you strike your pose, okay? And you don't ask what happened to the others, because deep down, you already know. In most professions, a promotion means more money, more respect, and the slight illusion of control. In your line of work, a promotion mostly means you've survived long enough without fainting, fleeing, or offending the wrong nobleman. If you're lucky, and lucky here includes a strong liver, flexible morals, and high cheekbones, you might be selected for an elevated role. That sounds glamorous, doesn't it? Almost imperial. In reality, it just means fancier costumes and clients with more titles in their names than teeth in their mouths. One day, Madame Shang calls you in. You brace for the usual reprimand, but instead, she tilts her head and says, "You've been noticed. Congratulations. You're now a house favorite." Okay, that means you'll get the juiciest clients. Not necessarily the best, just the ones who pay enough to justify your impending back problems. You're given a new robe, thicker makeup, and a new set of instructions that are somehow even more specific than before. Don't slouch, speak slower, lower your eyes, but not too much. Can Absolutely do not correct the client's calligraphy mid-suction. Apparently, that's off-putting. Promotion also comes with more backstage politics. The lower-ranked boys now, are you like a crane watching a frog? Your fans go missing. Your tea is mysteriously saltier. Otis mutters under his breath that beauty fades, but pettiness is forever. Still, there are perks. Your bedding is replaced. You get an extra dumpling on festival days. And once a visiting official gave you a turtle in a jade bowl and called it a symbol of longevity. You're still not sure if he meant for you or the turtle, but with status comes pressure. You're expected to be perfect, graceful, clever, always just shy of rebellion. You are the brothel's advertisement, its crown jewel, its heavily powdered product. And one misstep, one insulted general, one poorly timed yawn, and it's back to cleaning chamber pots with your sleeve. So you smile, you sing, you serve. You nod sagely at nonsense and pretend not to notice the ink stain on your sleeve from where you scribbled poems between visits. Promotion, it turns out, is just a higher shelf in the same cabinet. But hey, at least the dumplings are warmer. In the brothel, time isn't measured in years. It's measured in how long your face holds up under candlelight and rice powder. And let's just say the candles are brutal. Dude, you're not old. You're maybe 20-some, if anyone were actually keeping count. But in brothel years, you're pushing retirement. Your joints make suspicious noises. Your fan dances have a bit more ow than wow. And the new boys are starting to call you gay older brother with just a touch too much pity. You remember when you were the new boy, fresh-faced, terrified, and certain that eyeliner was a form of torture. You can apply it in your sleep, which you've done twice, okay? But you've learned something important, okay? Youth is currency, and you are now operating on credit. Clients still ask for you, but less for flirtation and more for deep conversation, a terrifying sign. Nothing screams you're aging out of desirability, like being valued for your personality. Madame Shang asks you like someone deciding whether to sell a horse or make it into soup. You overhear whispers about transitioning to tutor work, code for training the next crop of terrified teenagers. Fantastic. Nothing like watching your replacements arrive, shinier and more enthusiastic, with knees that don't audibly click. You start noticing things, crow's feet that weren't there before. The way your robe fits a little looser in the wrong places. The fact that you now require actual tea to stay awake instead of just theatrical tea sipping. And still, you keep up the act. You flirt, you sing. You say things like, "You remind me of a poem," while trying not to wheeze when your back spasms mid-bow, because aging in a brothel is like being a fading wall scroll. It's once admired, now mostly dusted around. Of course, there are legends of boys who age out gracefully, who marry rich clients, open their own tea houses, or vanish into myth like smoke through the rafters. But you suspect they're just that, legends, probably made up by Madame Shang to keep you moisturized and hopeful. So, you do what you must. The powder. You rehearse the lines. You laugh at jokes you've heard 1,000 times, okay? And you hope that when your curtain finally falls, you'll still remember who you were beneath the paint. You've heard the word tossed around a lot. Freedom, whispers between curtains, drunken promises from clients. The occasional poems someone scrolls on a napkin before burning it in the lantern light. But what is it really? In the brothel, freedom is a concept sold with the same enthusiasm as scented soap. It's out there somewhere, but always one tip, one favor, or one miracle away. Madame Shang sometimes dangles it like a carrot on a string. Serve well, and you may retire early, she say, as if retiring from this place didn't just mean you disappear one day and no one asks questions. Some say freedom is getting bought, as if becoming the private pet of a wealthy merchant is somehow liberation. Yes, you'd get a larger room and fancier silk, but you'd still be someone's ornament, just dusted more often. Others dream of escape, slipping out during festival chaos, hiding in a hay cart, reinventing yourself as a monk, a traveling musician, or something even more delusional, like a normal person. But you've seen what happens to those who try. Caught, dragged back, their punishment, quiet and private, but loud enough to echo in the bones of everyone else. You once asked an older boy, one who'd been there since before you could hold a teacup without trembling, what freedom meant to him. He just laughed and said, "It's when you can choose who touches you." Then he went back to trimming his lashes. Now, as you apply your paint and rehearse your smile for another round of gentle company, you begin to wonder, maybe freedom isn't a door that opens. Maybe it's a corner of your mind. They haven't reached a hidden place where your name still exists, untouched by rouge and rumor. Maybe it's writing poems in code. Maybe it's knowing that the client missed Confucius and not correcting him because you know better. Maybe it's finishing your dance, even when your ankles twisted because you decided you would. Tiny acts of rebellion dressed in silk and submission. So no, you're not free. Not yet. But inside, where no lantern can reach, you're still yours, okay? And in this place, that's a revolution. In the world of ancient Rome, clothing was never just about fabric stitched together. It was identity, reputation, and public status draped across the body for all to see. For women, no garment carried more weight than the stole. This long pleated dress was the defining costume of the respectable Roman matron, so much so that its absence could speak louder than its presence. If you were seen without one, society already had a story to tell about you, and it wasn't a flattering one. The slur itself was deceptively simple. A floor-length garment, sleeveless, or with short sleeves, often secured at the shoulders and tied with one or more belts around the waist. But like all Roman fashion, simplicity concealed layers of meaning. The cut created an image of modesty, covering the body while still allowing elegance. It was designed to move gracefully, to glide with the wearer rather than clink. To Romanize, this restraint reflected a woman's virtue, her modesty, chastity, and loyalty to her household. Wearing the stole said, "I belong to a family, to a husband, to Rome's social order." Material mattered just as much as form. A wealthy senator's wife might wear a stoler of imported silk or linen, light as air, and dyed in colors that screamed expense. These dyes, Tyrian purple, saffron yellow, deep emerald, were luxuries in themselves. A middle-class woman, by contrast, might wear one of wool, simple and unadorned, echoing the old Roman ideal of modest living. Thus, the stoler spoke two languages at once. It declared both respectability and rank. But not every woman had the right to wear it. Slaves, prostitutes, and women of Elrud were excluded. Widows often abandoned it, signaling the loss of their marital bond. Even divorced women might be pressured to put it away. To wear or not to wear was a matter of social regulation, one that reinforced who was inside and who was outside the bounds of Roman morality. So when you imagine a Roman street scene, women in long flowing stirs, crossing the Forum, or standing in temple courtyards, understand that you're not just looking at clothing, you're looking at a uniform of virtue, a garment heavy with meaning, one that whispered obedience, power, or shame, depending on the eyes that saw it. The slore was the foundation of Roman womanhood. The pallor was its finishing touch. Imagine a large rectangular shawl, sometimes plain, sometimes richly decorated, draped over the slur in endless variations. The pallor was both cloak and canvas. It was worn could signal a woman's mood, her intentions, and even her social aspirations. The simplest way was to let it hang loosely over the shoulders, a sign of relaxation or domestic comfort. But in public, women often pulled it tightly around the body, creating a cocoon of modesty. This was especially important in the bustling chaos of Roman streets, where men shouted, vendors bargained, and eyes followed every movement. Draping the pallor over the head, almost like a veil, transformed it into a symbol of chastity and reverence, particularly during religious ceremonies. A matron entering a temple with her head covered by the pal wasn't just respecting the gods. She was visually proclaiming her dignity to everyone present. Color and fabric elevated the message. Fine wool in muted tones gave an air of traditional Roman virtue, while silks dyed in luxurious purples and reds made a very different statement. Wealth, power, and connections that reached beyond Rome into the trade networks of the East. Elite women knew that eyes lingered on silk that shimmered in the sunlight, and they used that effect to command attention without a single word. A carefully draped pallor could show just enough of the jewels or embroidery beneath 2T status, while still maintaining the appearance of modesty. But the pallor could also carry moral judgment. A woman who neglected to wear it in public might be criticized as careless or immodest. Sadists, like Juvenal, mocked women who draped it too provocatively, twisting its folds into something flirtatious rather than respectable. Thus, the pallor was a double-edged garment, a shield of virtue, yet also a stage prop in Rome's endless theater of appearances. For Roman women, fashion was rarely neutral. Every gesture of fabric, whether the pallor was clutched close, swept dramatically over the shoulder, or drawn across the head, is a line in the ongoing performance of identity. In a society that scrutinized women's behavior relentlessly, the pallor gave them a language of folds and drapery to speak without words. In ancient Rome, hair was not just hair. It was a stage for wealth, power, and personality. For elite women, hairstyles became architectural wonders, with braids coiled like serpents, curls piled high into towers, and intricate arrangements held together by pins of ivory, silver, or even gold. To step out into society with a plain hairstyle was unthinkable for those who could afford extravagance. The head, after all, was the first thing people noticed. And in Rome, first impressions could make or break reputations. During the Republic, styles were simpler. Buns at the nape of the neck, hair parted in the middle, modestly arranged to reflect traditional Roman virtues of restraint and discipline. But by the empire, especially under the Julio, Claudian, and Flavian dynasties, restraint gave way to spectacle. Empresses like Julia, Domina, or the Flavian women turned their hair into living crowns towering several inches high. These coiffures required not only patience, but also an army of enslaved hairdressers known as ornatresses, who spent hours arranging every curl into perfection. The complexity of the style itself became a sign of wealth. If you had the time and servants to construct it, you clearly belonged to the highest class. Wigs and false hairpieces were another layer of the fashion. Roman women often imported blonde hair from Germany or red hair from Gaul, attaching it to their own locks to create contrast or volume, right? These additions added exotic flair, signaling both sophistication and Rome's dominion over faraway lands. Critics, of course, were quick to point out the irony. The same women who flaunted German hairpins were dressing themselves with the hair of conquered barbarians. Hairstyles also carried political undertones. Imitating the empress's hairdo was a way of aligning oneself with the ruling family. The empress wore waves of curls across her forehead. Soon, dozens of aristocratic women in Rome copied the look. Fashion thus spread not through magazines or TikTok trends, but through the silent power of imperial influence. To style your hair a certain way was to declare loyalty or at least admiration for the dynasty in charge, but there was danger in excess. Sadists like Juvenal mocked women whose hair grew so tall they needed scaffolding of wires, claimed their heads resembled ships ready for battle. Whether admired or ridiculed, Roman women's hairstyles were never neutral. Each curl was a statement, each braid a message. Their hair was not vanity. It was politics woven strand by strand. Clothing spoke of virtue and hair. Revealed fashion jewelry was where Roman women made their boldest declarations of wealth and power. Rings, necklaces, earrings, and bracelets weren't just decorative. They were investments, status symbols, and sometimes even political tools. The glitter of gold and the shimmer of gemstones announced a woman's place in society before she even introduced herself. Earrings were especially popular. Elite women wore elaborate pairs inlaid with pearls imported from the Persian Gulf or India, gems that traveled thousands of miles to rest on Roman ears. A single pearl could cost more than a soldier's yearly wage. And Roman writers loved to point out the extravagance. Pliny the Elder famously lamented that women wore entire fortunes dangling from their ears. To him, it was wasteful excess. To Roman matrons, it was a visible guarantee of their household's prosperity. Necklaces and chains often featured pendants of amethyst, emerald, or carnelian carved into cameos. These weren't just pretty stones. Many Romans believed gems carried protective or mystical properties. Amethyst was thought to guard against drunkenness, while coral was worn as a charm against evil spirits. Thus, jewelry served not only as adornment, but as a shield of superstition. A Roman woman might step into the forum with a necklace that was both a fashion piece and a silent prayer. Bracelets, often worn in pairs, encircled wrists, and sometimes even the upper arm. Designs mimicked snakes coiling around the limb, symbolizing eternity and rebirth. Rings were another favorite, often large and flashy, displaying gems engraved with family symbols, deities, or protective motifs. Though Roman law limited men to wearing one ring for citizenship, women were free to pile them on, and many did so with pride. For wealthy women, jewelry boxes were miniature treasure vaults. Goldsmiths and craftsmen catered to their tastes, while husbands often gifted jewels as tokens of affection or as public proof of their ability to provide. But jewelry could also become a source of criticism. Writers sneered at women who covered themselves in so many jewels that they resembled walking treasure chests, accusing them of vanity and greed. Still, jewelry endured as one of the most personal and powerful aspects of Roman women's fashion. Unlike the stola or palla, which were governed by social rules, jewelry was more flexible. It allowed women to showcase individuality, to blend luxury with superstition, and to wear their wealth literally on their skin. If clothing and jewelry framed the Roman woman's outward identity, cosmetics and perfumes added the finishing brushstrokes. To the modern eye, Roman beauty practices might seem indulgent, but in antiquity, they were serious business. Skin, scent, and makeup became tools of persuasion, allure, and sometimes even subtle defiance of social expectations. The ideal Roman complexion was pale, smooth, and unblemished. To achieve it, women used chalk powders, ground white lead, or even vinegar-based facial masks. Some recipes promised to brighten the skin, others to erase wrinkles or scars. Wealthier women had access to exotic ingredients imported from across the empire: Egyptian kohl, Babylonian powders, and rare resins. Of course, some of these mixtures were toxic, but beauty often came at a cost. To step into society with clear, pale skin was to show you didn't labor under the sun, that you lived a life of leisure, far removed from the toil of commoners. Rouge was equally important. Red cheeks and lips were painted using crushed mulberries, wine, dregs, or cinnabar. A touch of color signaled youth and vitality, but too much provoked scandal. Sadists gleefully mocked women who overpainted their faces, accusing them of hiding behind masks. Yet, the demand for rouge never disappeared. It was the little secret every Roman woman carried on her skin. Eye makeup was another battlefield. Its black kohl, drawn in bold lines around the eyes, created dramatic definition and was borrowed directly from Egyptian traditions. Green and blue eyeshadows made from malachite or lapis lazuli added flair. Though they were costly, as critics, these painted eyes suggested decadence. To admirers, they were captivating. Perfumed oils were then applied to the hair and body, completing the ensemble with invisible luxury. Perfumes themselves were an empire within the empire. Rome imported spices and resins from Arabia, India, and North Africa, blending them into complex fragrances stored in glass bottles or alabaster jars. The scent of frankincense, myrrh, or cinnamon clung to a woman as strongly as her slur or jewels. Perfume announced her arrival before she spoke and lingered after she left. Sensual signature. But as with all aspects of fashion, there was tension. Philosophers condemned heavy cosmetics and perfumes as signs of vanity or moral weakness. Still, for Roman women navigating a world that judged their appearance relentlessly, these powders and oils weren't just vanity, they were armor. With every painted cheek and perfumed wrist, they crafted power out of beauty. Though Roman women's fashion is often remembered for flowing fabrics and elaborate hairstyles, footwear was equally important. Shoes were more than protection for the feet. They were indicators of class, occasion, and even morality. To step into the world in the wrong pair was to risk whispers, satire, or outright exclusion. At the simplest level, Roman women wore sandals or sole, flat-soled and strapped with leather. These were the everyday choice, practical for the home and the warmer streets of Rome. Their simplicity, however, did not mean invisibility. Wealthy women could have their sandals decorated with colored leather, dyed straps, or even gilded studs, turning a humble design into a quiet flex of luxury. For indoor wear, especially in private households, some women went barefoot, suggesting intimacy and domestic ease. When stepping into public spaces, more formal footwear appeared. Calque closed leather shoes with laces were typically worn by the upper classes. Women often paired them with their stolars and palace for religious ceremonies or public appearances where formality mattered. The leather might be dyed in rich colors, reds, greens, even purples, showcasing expense and craftsmanship. These weren't shoes made for running through muddy streets. They were made to be seen. There were also specialized shoes for different settings. Banquets or theater visits might call for softer, more luxurious slippers, often embroidered or lined with delicate materials. In contrast, travel demanded sturdier footwear, thicker-soled shoes that could endure rough terrain. Even within the domestic sphere, footwear varied. Women of wealth might own slippers inlaid with jewels or precious metals, worn only within the safety of their villas, never risking the dust of the forum. Footwear could even carry symbolic weight. Certain shoes were reserved for rites and rituals, their colors or styles tied to religious meanings. Old shoes added stature and grace, lifting the wearer above the crowd, both literally and socially. Some shoes were designed to creak as the wearer walked, ensuring attention wherever she went. Writers often sneered at women who obsessed over fashionable shoes, accusing them of vanity or frivolity. Yet, in reality, footwear was an extension of the broader Roman obsession with appearances. Just as the stola and palace spoke of virtue, so too did shoes reveal refinement, wealth, and cultural awareness. To Roman women, even the smallest detail beneath their hem was another chance to declare who they were and who they were not. In Rome, fabric was never just fabric. It was a silent battlefield of class, wealth, and power. What you wore, and especially what color, it was told the world not just who you were, but what you were allowed to be. For women, this choice was deeply political. Wool was the traditional Roman fabric, practical and tied to old republican values of modest living. Women in humbler households spun and wove their own wool, and a plain wool stola marked a woman as virtuous, hard-working, and respectable. But as Rome expanded and the empire's wealth grew, fabrics from across the known world began to flood the markets. Linen from Egypt, cotton from India, and, above all, silk from China transformed elite fashion. Silk was light, translucent, and scandalously expensive. Critics It represented moral decline, proof that Roman women were draping themselves in the spoils of empire. To those who wore it, silk was pure prestige. Every shimmer in the sunlight, a reminder of their family's reach and resources. Color, too, carried enormous weight. White wool suggested purity and simplicity, especially appropriate for ceremonies and religious rituals. Bright saffron was linked to weddings, fertility, and celebration. Deep greens and blues offered fashionable variety, but could never rival the status of purple. Kyrian, purple, made from thousands of crushed sea snails, was the most coveted dye in the Roman world. So rare and costly was this pigment that laws restricted its use. Only emperors, empresses, and certain members of the elite could wear full garments of purple, though clever women often incorporated narrow stripes or borders into their stallers or palace to hint at power without breaking the rules. The politics of dye meant that a Roman woman's clothing was essentially a walking manifesto. A plain wool stoler could say, "I honor tradition," while a silk pallor in shimmering purple declared, "My family commands wealth and influence." The tension between these choices reflected the constant tug-of-war in Roman society, between old republican ideals and imperial extravagance. Sadists like Juvenal ridiculed women who draped themselves in fabrics finer than spiderweb, mocking their husbands for bankrupting themselves on foreign luxuries. Yet fashion was impossible to restrain as long as Rome remained an empire of conquest and trade. Its women would continue to wrap themselves in the colors of the world, and in doing so, make themselves living emblems of Rome's reach. In Rome, a woman's clothing was more than personal taste. It was a script she was forced to perform every day. Fashion revealed class as clearly as titles or wealth, and stepping outside those boundaries risked criticism or scandal. To dress was to declare who you were, and everyone was watching. For the elite, fashion was a stage of opulence. Tutorial and equestrian families draped their women in fine fabrics, jeweled accessories, and elaborate hairstyles that required teams of servants to maintain. A senator's wife, strolling through the forum in a silk stoller with a purple border, sent a clear message. This was a household of wealth and influence. The very impracticality of her clothing, delicate fabrics, towering hairstyles. Jewelry heavy enough to strain the neck showed that she never had to work, that her life was far removed from the sweat of the marketplace or the fields. For the middling classes, fashion played a subtler role. Wives of merchants, artisans, or military officers might not afford silk or precious stones, but they could still signal respectability with wool stolers, modest palace, and carefully kept hairstyles. Here, clothing was less about dazzling displays and more about upholding honor. The woman's neat, restrained appearance reflected well on her household, telling neighbors that her family valued discipline and stability. It's purehood. At the lowest level of society, fashion was stripped to its basics. Slaved women wore tunics, simple, practical garments meant for labor, not beauty. Their hair was often cropped short or tied back with little opportunity for adornment. Prostitutes, by law, were barred from wearing the slur, marking them instantly as outside the circle of respectable womanhood. Their clothing was deliberately provocative, designed to set them apart. Thus, garments did not merely express status, they enforced it. The Roman system of fashion also reinforced hierarchy in subtler ways. Laws known as sumptuary regulations tried to restrict extravagance, dictating who could wear certain fabrics or colors, though often ignored by the wealthy. These laws underscored the point. Fashion was not freedom. It was a regulated performance of social class for Roman women. Then, every garment was loaded with meaning. Clothing told the story of her household, her husband's rank, her family's wealth, or lack of it. Whether she wanted to or not, her fashion choices bound her to the system of class, turning her body into a billboard for Rome's social order. For Roman women, fashion was never just personal, It was political theater, woven in silk, wool, and gold. Every staller, every pow, every curl of hair was read as a sign of loyalty, morality, or ambition. In a society where women were excluded from formal politics, clothing became their language of influence, a way to maneuver within the rigid structures of Rome. Impresses set the tone. When Livia, wife of Augustus, appeared in simple white garments and understated jewelry, she was projecting the ideal of the modest traditional matron, perfect complement to Augustus' political image of restoring Roman virtue after years of civil war. Later, impresses like Julia Domer, with her iconic halo of curls, made hair itself a political statement, replicated across the empire by women who sought to align themselves with the imperial household. By copying an empress's style, elite women visually declared loyalty to the dynasty, turning fashion into propaganda. Public appearances made clothing even more significant. At religious festivals, women veiled their heads with apparel to signal reverence. At banquets, they wore brighter colors and displayed jewels to reflect their family's prosperity. Fashion operated as a sliding scale of messages. Piety in one setting, luxury in another, all while maintaining the careful balance of modesty expected of a Roman woman. Too plain, and she risked appearing neglectful. Too extravagant, and she became a target for satire and moral outrage. Writers and politicians understood this power. Statist, like Juvenal, ridiculed women whose fashions seemed to undermine traditional values, accusing them of corruption or greed. Meanwhile, moralists argued that excessive silks and jewels were signs of Rome's decline, blaming women for embracing foreign luxuries. Yet, this criticism only proved how much weight fashion carried. Women's clothing became a convenient canvas for broader anxieties about empire, wealth, and morality. Cultural exchange also shaped Roman fashion. Contact with Egypt, Greece, and the Near East introduced new fabrics, dyes, and styles. By wearing them, Roman women both embraced and displayed Rome's global reach. A silk pal wasn't just beautiful. It was a reminder that Rome ruled trade routes stretching to India and beyond. Thus, Roman women's fashion was far more than vanity. It was a coded language of loyalty, a performance of virtue, a display of wealth, and a reflection of empire. In the folds of their stallers and the glitter of their jewels, women broadcasted messages about power and identity in a world where they could not speak in the Senate, but could still command attention in the forum. The tale of the 47 Ronin begins not on a battlefield, but in the polished corridors of a Dedo castle, the heart of Tokugawa power. It was here, in 1701, that Lord Asano Naganori of Akko, a young daimyo entrusted with an important ceremonial duty, crossed paths with Kira Yoshinaka, a shogunate official responsible for instructing him in matters of court etiquette. On paper, their meeting should have been one of guidance and respect. In practice, it became the spark that would ignite one of Japan's most enduring legends. Kira was known for arrogance. He expected rich bribes and extravagant gifts from those he tutored, and when he felt slighted, his temper could be merciless. Sano, by contrast, was a man of upright character, not inclined to vain gestures or wasteful spending. From the moment they interacted, Kira treated him with disdain, belittling his lack of lavish offerings, mocking his inexperience, and humiliating him in front of others. For a samurai, such insults were not mere words. Pierce the wounds, to honor, cuts deeper than steel. The tension simmered until the morning of April 21st, 1701. Asano, pushed beyond endurance by Kira's taunts, reached his breaking point, in the sacred precincts of Edo Castle, where violence was strictly forbidden. He drew his short sword and lunged at his tormentor. The strike wounded Kira, leaving blood, but not death. Guards rushed to restrain Asano, horrified that the shogun's palace had been stained with violence. The consequences were immediate and severe. To draw a blade within the castle was was an act of unforgivable defiance, no matter the provocation. The shogunate acted swiftly. Lord Asano was sentenced to commit seppuku, the ritual suicide of a samurai. That very evening in his Edo residence, he performed the grim duty with composure, leaving behind no heirs and no future. For his house, his lands were confiscated, his clan dissolved. With a single stroke of his blade, Asano had sealed his fate, but he had also planted a seed in the hearts of his retainers. For the men of Akko, watching their lord die dishonored while his tormentor lived unpunished, was unbearable. They were now masterless samurai ronin, and though the law demanded their obedience to the shogun's judgment, their souls burned with another code, the unyielding loyalty of the samurai to avenge their fallen master. With Lord Asano, seppuku carried out in his domain confiscated, the men of Akko found themselves adrift. Overnight, loyal retainers became ronin, masterless samurai without rank, salary, or purpose. For men raised in a world where loyalty to one's lord was the foundation of life, it was a humiliation as bitter as the loss itself. Many clans in similar circumstances had scattered, seeking new masters, but the men of Akko were different. Their chief retainer, Oishi Kuranasek, stood at the center of their grief. Calm, deliberate, and known for his wisdom, Oishi gathered the core group of Asano's retainers and posed the question none dared voice. Should they bow to fate, or should they avenge their lord? Vengeance was dangerous, meant defying the shogunate, breaking the peace of the Tokugawa order, and likely meeting death. But to abandon their duty was unthinkable. Okay, in hushed voices, they agreed. Their true loyalty was not to the shogun's decree, but to the man who had given them honor. Lord Asano. The plan was not declared openly, even among themselves. Instead, they swore a silent oath to one another. 47 men, bound by shared disgrace, would dedicate themselves to a single purpose, the destruction of Kira Yoshinaka. Yet, vengeance could not be rushed. Kira, fearing retaliation, fortified his mansion and doubled his guard. The shogunate expected the Akko ronin to scatter, but Kira expected the opposite. A direct strike. His patience would be their only weapon. Oishi, understanding this, disbanded the group temporarily. Some ronin took up trades as merchants, artisans, or monks, blending into ordinary life. Others wandered, living as drifters, to avoid suspicion. Even Oishi himself seemed to abandon the path of honor, moving to Kyoto, drinking heavily, and visiting Brothel until he earned a reputation as a fallen man. To outsiders, it looked as though the Akkonin had lost their spirit, but beneath the facade, their bond remained unbroken. Every humiliation, every disguise, was part of a larger strategy to lull Kira into a false sense of security. For nearly 2 years, they endured. Their oath was not sealed in ceremony or words carved in stone, but in the quiet determination of men who refused to let time or dishonor erase their master's name. The 47 ronin had set themselves on a path that could end only in triumph or death, and, in their hearts, they welcomed both. While the ronin scattered into disguise, Kira Yoshinaka lived in a state of anxious watchfulness. Though he had escaped Asano's blade with little more than a wound to his forehead, he knew the danger was not past. Samurai loyalty ran deep, and vengeance was a ghost that could haunt a man for years before striking. The thought of Asano's retainers biding their time gnawed at him day and night. At first, Kira reacted with paranoia. He fortified his mansion in Edo, hiring guards, raising high wooden walls, and ordering watchmen to patrol the grounds. Every creak in the night, every rumor in the streets seemed like a sign that the Akko ronin were near. He rarely ventured outside without an escort, and even then his eyes scanned alleys and rooftops. To his retainers, he was a lord under siege from his own fears. Yet, as months passed and no attack came, his vigilance wavered. News trickled in of Oishi Kuranosuke's supposed disgrace in Kyoto, how the once loyal retainer had abandoned dignity drinking, and consorting with courtesans. Other Ronin were said to have melted into the population, taking up trades or vanishing into obscurity. Whispers suggested they had lost heart, broken by poverty and dishonor. Slowly, Kira's confidence returned to those around him. Kira seemed eager to believe the threat had dissolved. He reduced his guards, relaxed the nightly watches, thanked, and resumed something like his former life of ceremony and courtly duties. Still, the stain of Asano's attack lingered. Many saw Kira as a man who had provoked his lord into a fatal breach of protocol, and his reputation suffered despite his survival. He feared public shame almost as much as he feared the Ronin swords, but complacency crept in all the same. The fortifications remained, but the discipline within them softened. Guards slacked in their duties, assuming the danger had passed. Servants, too, grew careless, and Kira himself, relieved by the passage of time, lowered the shield of constant suspicion. He had convinced himself that the Ronin had abandoned vengeance, that they had chosen survival over loyalty. This was exactly the illusion Oishi and his men had cultivated. For every night, Kira slept easier, believing himself safe. The Ronin drew closer to the moment when patience would give way to steel. Kira's uneasy vigilance, once sharp, was fading into the arrogance that would soon seal his fate, while Kira slowly let his guard down. Ushi Kurinosaki was crafting one of the most brilliant deceptions in samurai history. If the Ronin struck too soon, Kira would be ready, and the shogunate would crush them without hesitation. The only path to success was patience, and to make Kira believe vengeance was no longer possible. To achieve this, Oishi sacrificed his own honor. In Kyoto, Oishi deliberately dismantled his reputation. Once respected as a loyal and disciplined retainer, he began frequenting the pleasure quarters, staggering through the streets, drunk and wasting nights in brothel. His family endured whispers of disgrace. His wife, unable to bear the shame, eventually left him. Even some of the Ronin questioned whether their leader had truly lost his way. Yet this fall into apparent ruin was carefully calculated. Every drunken stumble, every scene of debauchery was a mask. Kira's spies in Kyoto reported back eagerly. Kia, the feared chief retainer of Akko, had become a broken man. If their enemy's leader had collapsed into vice, then surely the other Ronin had dispersed for good. This was exactly the impression Oishi wanted. He knew that Kira's arrogance and need for reassurance would blind him to the possibility of deeper strategy. To the outside world, IC appeared finished, but behind the scenes, he was in constant communication with the surviving Akko Ronin. Letters delivered in secret coordinated their movements. Some Ronin became merchants, others monks, and one even married into a tradesman's family to disguise his true identity. Each sacrifice was made in silence, their loyalty hidden beneath the cloak of ordinary life. The deception was not without its dangers. At one point, a samurai from another clan, disgusted by Oishi's drunken behavior, attacked him in the street and spat upon him for betraying the way of the warrior. Oishi accepted the humiliation without resistance. For him, the insult was a weapon in disguise, proof that his charade was convincing. Every blow to his public image brought him closer to the moment of vengeance. By the time nearly 2 years had passed, Kira's confidence had fully returned. His defenses slackened, his vigilance dulled. To him, Oishi was a ruined man, and the Ronin of Akko were no more. But beneath the mask of disgrace, 47 blades still gleamed in the shadows, waiting for the night when patience would end and justice would begin. By late 1702, almost 2 years after Asano's death, the Ronin's long deception had run its course. Kira was comfortable again, his mansion less guarded, his vigilance dulled. The time for patience was ending. Quietly, Aishi began to call his scattered comrades back into the fold. One by one from Kyoto, Edo, and the provinces, the men of Akko returned to their hidden brotherhood. The gathering was not done openly. Okay? Each Ronin had lived a double life. Okay? Merchants tending shops, monks chanting sutras, farmers working the soil. To abandon these disguises at once would have raised suspicion. Instead, they slipped away under false pretenses, converging on esoteric shadows in rented houses on the city's outskirts. They reunited. What must it have felt like after 2 years of secrecy and humiliation to clasp the hands of comrades once more? They were no longer broken men. They were a living army of loyalty. At the center of their strategy was Oishi. He revealed to them that their disguises had succeeded. Kira believed them finished, his guard reduced. The time for vengeance had come. Yet he also reminded them that this mission was not glory. It was death. Attacking Kira was defiance of the shogunate, and the outcome was inevitable. None would live long after the deed. Still, each man swore again to the path of loyalty. Their oaths were not spoken lightly. They were binding promises to die with honor. They planned meticulously. The Ronin studied Kira's mansion, its walls, its gates, the routines of its guards. They even built a scale model of the estate to rehearse their attack. Each man was assigned a role, some to storm the gates, others to scale the walls, others to secure the inner chambers. Their weapons were polished, their armor prepared. Yet they kept their appearance modest, avoiding anything that might betray their purpose. One remarkable detail was their commitment to discipline. Despite the hunger and hardship of years without a lord, they forbade looting or personal gain. This was not to be a raid for profit, but a mission of honor. They were blades sharpened for one strike alone. As winter deepened in Edo, the Ronin waited for the night when their loyalty would explode into vengeance. Their secret gathering was complete. 47 men stood together, united by grief, by duty, and by a single, unshakable truth. They would restore their master's honor, even if it cost them their lives. On the snowy night of January 30th, 1703, the Ronin struck. Edo lay cloaked in silence, its streets muffled by a heavy winter storm. This was the perfect cover, snow to mask their footsteps, darkness to shield their approach. 47 men, dressed in black and armed with swords, spears, and bows, moved as one. After nearly 2 years of waiting, their oath was about to be fulfilled. Oishi divided the men into 2 groups. One would storm the front gate of Kira's mansion, drawing attention with ferocious noise. The other would scale the rear walls surrounding the compound so no one could escape. Orders were strict. Protect the innocent. Harm no women, children, or servants. Their enemy was Kira alone, and the Ronin's honor demanded they act with discipline. The attack began with the crash of hammers and the crack of wood. As the front gate gave way, the guards inside, startled from sleep, rushed to meet them. But the Ronin fought with precision. Their years of planning showed. Each man knew his place, his role, his target. Arrows flew into the night. Drums beat to signal their movements, and the mansion erupted in chaos. Kira's retainers fought desperately, but they were outnumbered and unprepared. Some attempted to rally, but the Ronin pressed forward, cutting them down with steady resolve. At the rear of the estate, the second group scaled the walls and secured the exits, ensuring no escape was possible. The compound was a trap, and inside it, Kira Yoshinaka was cornered. As the battle raged, servants and women were ushered to safety. The Ronin shouted assurances that no harm would come to them, calming panic where they could. It was not slaughter, but justice, carried out with the discipline of warriors, bound by code. Still, the fighting was fierce. Blades clashed, shouts echoed through the snowy air, and blood stained the white ground. At last, the Ronin reached the inner chambers, but Kira was nowhere to be found. Rooms were searched, doors broken, cupboards emptied. The man who had mocked and humiliated their lord was hiding like a rat within his own walls. The Ronin pressed deeper, relentless, until they found the place where vengeance waited. This night was not a raid for plunder. It was the execution of an oath. And though the snow fell gently on Ado's rooftops inside Kira's mansion, it was a storm of steel and loyalty. The Ronin swept through Kira's mansion, room by room, their blades cutting through resistance until only silence remained. Yet their true target was still missing. She ordered a thorough search. Lanterns flickered against wooden walls as men tore apart closets, slid open doors, and overturned chests. Servants were questioned at sword point. Finally, in a dark, out-of-way chamber, they found him, Kira Yoshinaka, trembling, concealed inside a storage shed, clutching nothing more than a short blade. It was a pitiful sight. The man whose arrogance had driven Lord Asano to ruin now crouched in fear, his face pale, his dignity gone. The Ronin dragged him into the open, and the moment felt heavy with history. After nearly 2 years of waiting, planning, and enduring disgrace, vengeance was within reach. But the Ronin were not murderers in the shadows. They were samurai bound by code. Oishi stepped forward and addressed Kira with formality. He offered him the chance to die as a samurai by his own hand. The Ronin presented Kira with a dagger, the very blade that Lord Asano had used to commit seppuku in Edo Castle. The symbolism was unmistakable. The dishonored courtier would meet his end by the same steel that had taken the life of the man he had humiliated. But Kira faltered. He could not summon the courage to take his own life. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps shame, but in refusing seppuku, he revealed himself as the opposite of everything the samurai ideal demanded. After waiting a respectful moment, Aishi gave the order. One of the Ronins stepped forward and delivered the death blow, severing Kira's head cleanly with a single stroke. The act was quick, decisive, and untainted by cruelty. When it was done, the Ronin bowed. For them, vengeance was not an act of rage, but the fulfillment of duty. Kira's head was placed in a bucket to be carried with solemn care. No cheers erupted, no celebrations. Instead, a deep silence fell over the mansion. Their oath had been kept. Their honor and that of Lord Asano was restored. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the blood-stained ground. The Ronin gathered together, weary yet resolute. They had completed their mission, but they knew the path ahead was short. For samurai who defied the shogunate, there could be no pardon. Yet, as they prepared to leave Kira's estate, each man walked with lighter steps. They had chosen loyalty over life, and in that choice, they had become immortal. With Kira's head secured, the 47 Ronin emerged from the mansion into the snowy streets of Adeto. Dawn had not yet broken, and the city lay in hushed stillness, its rooftops heavy with white. The Ronin, weary from battle, but resolute, formed a solemn procession. At the front, Oishi carried the bucket containing Kira's severed head, cradled, not as a trophy, but as proof of justice fulfilled. Behind him, the others followed in silence, their weapons blood-stained, their armor dusted with snow. The streets stirred with whispers as words spread. Townsfolk, peering from windows and doorways, recognized the men of Akko. For 2 years, these Ronin had been objects of pity or ridicule. Masterless samurai who seemed to waste their lives in disgrace. Now, seeing them march in order with their vengeance complete, people bowed in respect. The spectacle was not one of rebellion, but of loyalty so pure it stirred. Even those who had mocked Oishi's drunken charade now realized its purpose. The Ronin's destination was Senkakuji Temple, where Lord Asano was buried. Their march was both funeral and pilgrimage. At each step, the snow muffled the sound of their sandals, as though the city itself were holding its breath. They passed checkpoints unchallenged. No one dared stop them, for their mission was already understood. In Adeto, samurai values still carried weight, and the sight of men walking willingly toward their fate commanded reverence. When they reached the temple, the Ronin entered its quiet grounds. Before Asano's grave, they knelt and placed Kira's head upon the stone, offering it to their fallen lord as a final act of service. Some wept openly, their long years of shame and sacrifice pouring out. In that moment, others prayed silently, their faces calm with the serenity of duty fulfilled. For them, this was not revenge. It was restitution, the balancing of a cosmic scale tilted by injustice. The monks of Sangakuji received them with solemnity, offering shelter within the temple walls. But the Ronin knew this was not the end. Word of their deed would soon reach the shogun, and judgment was inevitable. Still, they rested peacefully that night. They had not fled, nor hidden their act. They had marched openly through Edo, announcing to all that their vengeance was just. By the next morning, their story had spread across the city like fire through dry grass. The Ronin had become more than men. They were the embodiment of loyalty, and their fate was now in the hands of the shogunate. The 47 Ronin did not flee after fulfilling their oath. Instead, they awaited the inevitable summons of the shogunate. To defy the law by killing Kira Yoshinaka was treason, but to abandon their lord's honor had been impossible. They had chosen the way of loyalty, knowing the price would be death. In Edo, debate flared across every class. Were these men criminals or heroes? Shogun Tokugawa Tsunayoshi faced a dilemma. On one hand, the Ronin had broken the shogunate's peace by committing an illegal vendetta. Allowing such an act to go unpunished might encourage other clans to take justice into their own hands. On the other, their loyalty embodied the very essence of the samurai code, Bushido, which the shogunate itself promoted as the moral backbone of society. Punish them harshly, and he risked turning martyrs into symbols greater than the law. After weeks of deliberation, the verdict was delivered. The Ronin would be permitted an honorable death, rather than execution. By disgraceful means, they were ordered to commit seppuku. This decision both upheld the law and recognized their loyalty. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, yet ensured their story would be remembered with dignity. On the appointed day, each Ronin prepared himself calmly. They dressed in white robes, the color of purity, and performed the ritual with the same discipline that had guided their mission. One after another, they opened their bellies while their comrades stood ready to deliver the merciful final stroke. Even in death, they acted together, a brotherhood unbroken. The people of Edo mourned them. Crowds gathered at Sangakuji Temple, where the Ronin were buried alongside Lord Asano. Visitors left incense, flowers, and prayers, honoring men who had chosen loyalty over survival. In the centuries that followed, their graves became a pilgrimage site, and their story was retold in plays, poems, and novels. The tale of the 47 Ronin became not just a historical episode, but a moral legend, embodying the eternal struggle between law and honor. Their legacy endures because it forces a timeless question. Is loyalty to one's lord greater than loyalty to the law? Choosing death over dishonor, the Ronin answered with their lives. More than 300 years later, their march through snowy Edo still echoes as one of the greatest stories of samurai devotion ever told. The story of Yoshiwara begins in the early 17th century when the Tokugawa shogunate tightened its grip on Japan. Edo, the shogun's capital, had exploded into a bustling city of merchants, warriors, and travelers. With its swelling population came appetites for food, for theater, for companionship. Pleasure was in demand, but unregulated indulgence carried dangers, disorder, disease, and unchecked crime. The government decided that desire, like everything else in Tokugawa, Japan, needed to be contained, managed, and placed behind walls. In 1617, authorities granted official sanction to a licensed quarter devoted solely to entertainment and sex. It was built on marshy land outside Edo, reclaimed from swamps and rivers. The district was given the name Yoshiwara, Good Meadow, a name both ironic and poetic, hinting at a place where natural pleasure was cultivated under careful design. Surrounded by a moat and enclosed by high walls, Yoshiwara was literally a city within a city. There was only one gate. Once a man stepped through it, he entered a world where the rigid hierarchies of Adu life softened, if only for a night. The idea was both moral and practical. By confining brothel and courtesans to one location, the shogunate could monitor vice while profiting from it through taxes and regulations. Disorderly streets elsewhere in Adeto were cleaned by pushing all illicit commerce into Yoshiwara, and within those walls, pleasure was not a crime. It was policy. Yet, this containment also gave Yoshiwara an identity unlike anywhere else in Japan. It was a place where fantasy was staged, where reality was suspended, and where reputation, wealth, and longing collided under lantern light. From the beginning, Yoshiwara was more than a red light district. It was designed as an entertainment hub where brothels stood beside tea houses, theaters, and shops. Its streets were laid out with an almost theatrical geometry, creating long processional avenues where courtesans could be displayed like living art. The district was not hidden in shame. It was showcased. Samurai, merchants, artisans, even poets and painters crossed its gate, seeking not just physical pleasure, but immersion in a dream world. Thus, the birth of Yoshiwara was both an act of control and creation. By walling off vice, the shogunate had inadvertently built one of the most vibrant cultural centers of early modern Japan, a place where desire and artistry blended into a spectacle that would define Edo nightlife for centuries. Passing through the single grand gate of Yoshiwara was like stepping into another world. Outside, Edo followed the rigid order of Tokugawa law. Samurai at the top, merchants and artisans below, farmers bound to their land. Side, hierarchy blurred, and wealth spoke louder than birth. Lowly merchant who bowed to samurai in the daytime could stroll into Yoshiwara at night, spend lavishly, and find himself seated beside men of higher rank. The walls of the district did more than enclose. They transformed. The city within was carefully planned. Broad avenues stretched in neat lines designed for processions and display. At night, these streets glowed with hundreds of paper lanterns, their flickering light casting a warm haze on the wooden facades of brothel and tea houses. The most famous of these avenues was the Nakanu, a wide main street where visitors paraded, courtesans appeared informal, procession and the district itself became a stage. Even those who came with no money to spend could walk the streets, marvel at the colors, and catch glimpses of beauty behind latticed windows. The architecture itself announced Yoshiwara's purpose. Brothel were built with elegant facades, their upper floors screened with wooden latticework. Behind these slats, courtesans sat in view, dressed in brilliant silks, their faces painted white, their hair arranged in towering, elaborate styles. To the passerby, there were living ornaments, each a carefully arranged display of refinement and allure. Tea houses, meanwhile, buzzed with music, laughter, and the pouring of sake, offering spaces where deals were struck and poems recited. But Yoshiwara was more than its buildings. It was an atmosphere. The sounds of shamisen, the sharp crack of getter sandals on the wooden streets, the mingling of perfumes and incense filled the night air. It was said that even the air smelled different inside Yoshiwara, thick with excitement and anticipation. To enter was to step out of ordinary life and into a dream, carefully crafted to intoxicate the senses. What made Yoshiwara unique was the way it mixed control with fantasy. Every movement was choreographed, every display curated, yet the effect was one of liberation. Visitors knew they were in an artificial world, but that was precisely the appeal. For a few hours, they were free from the weight of rank, duty, and the monotony of daily life. Yoshiwara was not just a place. It was an escape, a parallel city where desire shaped reality. At the heart of Yoshiwara were its women, the courtesans, who transformed the district from a market plaque of bodies into a theater of fantasy. Yoshiwara's courtesans were elevated into celebrities. They were not hidden in back alleys, but displayed openly, dressed in silks so dazzling that poets compared them to blossoms in eternal spring. Courtesans were ranked in a strict hierarchy, with the most celebrated known as Qi. These women were not merely companions, but arbiters of fashion and taste. They trained for years in calligraphy, poetry, music, and dance. An evening with an Ouyang was not simply a transaction. It was a performance of refinement, where wit, elegance, and artistry mattered as much as beauty. To win an audience with one required enormous wealth and patience. Often, men had to prove their seriousness by visiting multiple times, spending lavishly in tea houses before they were even granted the privilege of speaking to her directly. The appearance of an oil run in public was an event in itself. She would parade through Yoshiwara's main avenue, accompanied by attendants. Her robes layered in rich fabrics, her towering hairstyle pinned with ornate combs and hairpins. On her feet were come platform sandals, so high she could only walk slowly, each step deliberate and theatrical. Crowds gathered to watch, for the ON embodied the ultimate fusion of desire and spectacle. She was a living symbol of luxury, the pinnacle of Edito's pleasure culture. Beneath the glamour, however, lay stark realities. Many courtesans began as young girls sold into the district by impoverished families, bound by contracts they had little choice in. Life in Yoshiwara was a paradox, gilded with luxury, yet caged by obligation. For every ON who commanded admiration, countless others lived and died in obscurity, serving customers with little chance of rising in rank. Their painted smiles concealed the exhaustion of endless nights, the burden of debts, and the fragility of a life dictated by beauty's short span. Yet, within this paradox, courtesans carved out influence. They shaped trends in fashion and language, inspiring kabuki theater and literature. Men of wealth and status vied for their attention, and poets immortalized them in verse. In a society that confined most women to domestic spheres, Yoshiwara's courtesans became public figures, simultaneously powerful and powerless, adored and exploited. They were the stars of Yoshiwara, and without them, the lantern-lit streets would have been little more than shadows. While the courtesans were the jewels of Yoshiwara, the district's life pulsed through its tea houses and theaters. These were not side attractions, but essential stages in the choreography of pleasure. They provided the setting where introductions were made, reputations polished, and nights of extravagance unfolded. Tea houses in Yoshiwara were unlike the quiet establishments elsewhere in Edo. Here, there were lively hubs, buzzing with music, conversation, and the constant pouring of sake. Guests' evening often began in one of these tea houses, where he was entertained by attendants, musicians, and sometimes lower-ranking courtesans. These spaces functioned as intermediaries. No man simply walked into a brothel and demanded an aran. He had to establish himself first, often with the tea house acting as a broker. The more lavishly he spent in these early stages, the greater his chances of being recommended to a high-ranking courtesan. The atmosphere inside was intoxicating. Musicians played shamisen, dancers performed traditional routines, and witty banter flowed as freely as the sake. For samurai, merchants, and poets alike, this was more than indulgence. It was theater. Men performed roles of sophistication and generosity, hoping to impress. To hold one's own in a Yoshiwara tea house meant demonstrating not just wealth, but cultural polish. The ability to compose a poem, appreciate a melody, or engage in clever wordplay. Alongside tea houses, theaters added another layer to the district's allure. Kabuki, once considered a rowdy form of entertainment, found a natural home in Yoshiwara's orbit. Its colorful costumes, exaggerated gestures, and dramatic plots mirrored the heightened realities of the pleasure district itself. Many kabuki plays were inspired by Yoshiwara life, turning courtesans and clients into archetypes on stage. In return, kabuki actors often mingled with Yoshiwara's clientele, blurring the line between performance and reality. The synergy between tea houses, courtesans, and theaters gave Yoshiwara its unique cultural depth. It was not only a place to purchase intimacy, but to participate in a wider spectacle of refinement. A night in Yoshiwara was an orchestration of senses. The taste of sake, the sound of chemise and strings, the sight of lantern-lit parades, the scent of incense wafting through crowded rooms. Every detail contributed to the illusion that within these walls, one lived not an ordinary life, but a heightened, almost dreamlike existence. Yoshiwara thrived because it offered more than pleasure. It offered performance. And in this theater of desire, everyone from merchants to poets became both spectator and actor. If courtesans were the stars of Yoshiwara, the patrons were its lifeblood. Every lantern that glowed and every shamisen that played was fueled by the silver and ambition of those who passed through the district's gate. What made Yoshiwara fascinating was not just who worked there, but who came seeking its pleasures. Men from every corner of Edo society, all temporarily equalized by desire and wealth. Merchants were the most frequent visitors in the strict Tokugawa hierarchy. Merchants occupied one of the lowest official classes, yet in reality, they held vast financial power. Samurai might have status, but merchants controlled coin. Yoshiwara became the one place where their money could buy not just luxury, but status. Inside its walls, a wealthy merchant could command the attention of an own, dine in style, and be treated as if he were nobility. High-end. In this way, the district inverted Edito's rigid order, allowing the merchant class to flaunt influence, denied to them outside. Samurai, meanwhile, entered Yoshiwara with a different aura. They were bound by duty, but many found themselves drawn to the pleasures within. Some came as patrons of high rank, displaying both authority and refinement by courting famous courtesans. Others, however, slipped in secretly, their visits disguised to avoid scrutiny from superiors. For samurai, Yoshiwara offered a paradox, a place where honor and discipline gave way to indulgence, yet also a stage where they could perform sophistication through poetry, music, and cultured conversation. Poets and artists were perhaps the most enchanted by Yoshiwara. The courtesans themselves inspired endless verse paintings and woodblock prints. Many artists lingered in tea houses, not because they could afford the company of an urine, but because they were captivated by the spectacle of beauty and performance. Haiku love poems and satirical songs poured from the pens of those who visited, turning Yoshiwara into both muse and marketplace of creativity. Even the shogunate officials and nobility could be counted among the visitors, though their presence was often discreet. Yoshiwara was, after all, a mirror of Edo itself, rigid by day, fluid by night. Here, social roles blurred under candlelight, and men performed versions of themselves they could never display in the rigid streets beyond the gate. Patrons sustained Yoshiwara not just with their money, but with their longing to escape. The district was a theater, and every man who entered became both audience and actor in its shimmering play of desire. Yoshiwara was more than a district of pleasure. It was a cultural engine that shaped the entire aesthetic of Edo. The term Yukayo, meaning floating world, was born here. A philosophy of living in the moment, savoring beauty and accepting life's fleeting nature within Yoshiwara's walls. Fashion and art weren't side notes. They were the heartbeat of this world of ephemerality. Courtesans, especially the famed Aran, were trendsetters. Their elaborate silk kimonos, heavy with embroidered cranes, chrysanthemums, or waves, dazzled visitors and set standards copied across the city. Each season brought new colors and motifs, and tailor and Edo rushed to imitate the styles glimpsed in Yoshiwara parades. Hairstyles, too, grew more extravagant. Towering arrangements pinned with dozens of kanzashi hair ornaments. What began as the fashion of courtesans trickled down into the city streets, reshaping the appearance of women far beyond the pleasure quarter. Art flourished in Yoshiara's glow. Ukiyo-e immortalized courtesans, actors, and famous scenes from the district. These prints circulated widely, allowing even those who never passed through the Yoshiara gate to experience its allure. Artists like Kitagawa Utamaro captured the delicate beauty of courtesans, while Utagawa, Hiroshige, and Hakusai depicted the lantern-lit avenues and moonlit rooftops of the quarter. Through their works, Yoshiwara's pleasures became both fantasy and commodity, spreading across Japan like souvenirs of desire. Theater, especially kabuki, fed from this same well. Plots often mirrored the intrigues and romances of Yoshiara, while actors borrowed the flamboyant styles of courtesans. In turn, courtesans styled themselves after kabuki stars, creating a feedback loop of performance and imitation. So audiences flocked to plays that dramatized the life of the district, turning Yoshiwara into both muse and mirror. Even poetry and literature found fertile ground here. Samurai and merchants alike composed verses inspired by their nights in the floating world, blending longing with melancholy. To write of Yoshiara was to write of fleeting beauty, of cherry blossoms that fall even as they bloom. In this way, Yoshiwara was not just a marketplace of bodies, but of ideas. Its fashions dictated trends. Its art filled homes across the city, and its ethos of living, for the moment of savoring life's fleeting joys, defined an entire cultural era. The floating world was a dream, but one that left very real imprints on Japanese art, literature, and style. To the outsider strolling Yoshiwara's lantern-lit streets, the district appeared as a dazzling carnival of freedom. Men could mingle across class lines. Courtesans appeared to command attention like queens, and the atmosphere promised escape from the rigid order of Tokugawa society. Yet beneath the shimmer, Yoshiwara was not liberation. It was confinement, wrapped in silk. The women at the center of the spectacle, often had little choice in their fate. Many had been sold into Yoshiwara as children by impoverished families, bound to brothel by contracts that lasted years, sometimes decades. The path to becoming a high-ranking courtesan like an oi was brutally narrow. Most girls labored at lower ranks, their lives consumed by long nights, demanding patrons and crushing debts. To outsiders, they appeared as icons of glamour. To themselves, they were trapped within a gilded cage. Even the own, admired as cultural leaders and arbiters of taste, lived within strict boundaries. There, every movement was choreographed, from the way they walked in processions to the way they conversed with clients. The appearance of choice was itself part of the performance. Men believed they were pursuing the courtesan, proving their worth through repeated visits and lavish spending. In reality, the courtesan's freedom to accept or reject was tightly managed by the brothel's interests. What seemed like agency was often strategy designed to maximize profit while keeping the illusion alive. The illusion extended to the patrons as well. Merchant might feel like a lord for the night, basking in the attentions of courtesans, but once he stepped back through the gate, the strict social hierarchy of Edo awaited him. Samurai, who let themselves relax within Yoshiara's walls, returned to the rigid codes of duty and obedience outside. Yoshiara's promise of freedom was temporary, a dream one rented with coin, but never truly owned. Yet, perhaps, that fleeting quality was its greatest power. The district thrived because it offered the fantasy of liberation, even if only for a few hours. The courtesan smiles, the music of shamisen, the poetry exchanged in candlelight, all created a space where both men and women could pretend, if only briefly, that they lived in a world unbound by duty and rank. Yoshiara's brilliance lay not in offering real freedom, but in selling its illusions so convincingly that people returned again and again, willingly stepping into the cage for another taste of the dream. If Yoshiwara was a dream world, it was one forever haunted by fire. Edo was a city of wood and paper, and Yoshiwara, with its dense rows of brothel and lantern-lit streets, was especially vulnerable. Time and again, flames swept through the district, reducing its shimmering facades to smoldering ash. Each time, the courtesans and patrons scattered in panic, only for the district to be rebuilt and reborn as though pleasure itself was indestructible. The most devastating of these disasters came in 1657 with the Great Mareki Fire, which consumed much of Adato. Yoshiwara was utterly destroyed. In its ashes, authorities saw an opportunity. Rather than abandoning the district, they relocated it farther from Edo's center onto reclaimed marshland north of Asakasa. This new Yoshiwara became even more elaborate with wider avenues, deeper mows, and grander brothel. What fire had consumed spectacle replaced. The district's rebirth only added to its mystique. It seemed nothing could extinguish the floating world. Yet, with each rebuilding came change. By the 18th century, Yoshiwara reached its golden age, drawing samurai, merchants, artists, and poets in a constant stream. But prosperity also brought decline. The romantic aura of the Yorin began to wane as the culture shifted. Courtesans of the highest rank required enormous investments of time and wealth, and many patrons sought quicker pleasures with lower-ranking women, kabuki actors, and geisha, offering entertainment outside Yoshiwara's gates competed for attention. The monopoly of desire, once held firmly behind Yoshiwara's walls, began to fray. By the 19th century, Yoshiwara's image had shifted again. Fire still ravaged its streets, but rebuilding no longer restored its full brilliance. The rise of new forms of entertainment, tea house, geisha, theater culture, even the beginnings of Western influence drew people elsewhere. The Orin, once unrivaled icons of fashion, were increasingly seen as relics of an older era. The very system that had elevated them, rigid hierarchy, long rituals, and costly contracts, made them less adaptable than the emerging geisha, who offered intimacy and artistry in more flexible, accessible ways. Still, decline did not mean disappearance. Kyora remained a landmark of Edo life, woven into the city's identity. Its fires and rebuildings mirrored the fleeting nature of the floating world itself. Everything beautiful was destined to vanish, only to return in another form. In this cycle of destruction and renewal, Yoshiwara embodied both the resilience and impermanence of pleasure. Though the Yoshiwara Pleasure District eventually declined, its cultural imprint has never faded. By the late 19th century, with Japan opening to the west and Edo transformed into Tokyo, the old floating world began to unravel. Western fashions and entertainments competed with traditional forms, and the Meiji government viewed licensed prostitution with increasing unease. By the early 20th century, Yoshiwara's grandeur had faded into something more sordid, and the fires of World War II finally reduced much of the district to ruins. Yet, the memory of Yoshiwara proved more enduring than its walls. What survived was the myth, a lantern-lit city where desire, art, and performance blended into a shimmering spectacle. Artists of the Ukiyo-e tradition had already immortalized Yoshiwara in print that circulated widely, ensuring that its courtesans and streets lived on as icons. Writers and poets, too, had woven its atmosphere into verse, capturing the bittersweet tension between beauty and impermanence. Even as the real district vanished, Yoshiwara lingered in Japan's imagination as a symbol of the floating world itself. The Orin, once flesh and blood women bound by contracts, became legendary figures. In festivals today, their processions are reenacted, with performers in towering hairpieces and impossibly tall sandals moving slowly through the streets. These parades echo the grandeur of Yoshiwara's past, transforming what was once commerce into cultural heritage. The geisha, who rose partly in Yoshiwara's shadow, carried forward the artistic traditions of music, key, dance, and refined entertainment, giving another afterlife to the district's legacy. Modern Japan remembers Yoshiwara with ambivalence. On one hand, it is seen as a place of exploitation, where women were trapped in gilded cages for the sake of men's pleasure. On the other, it is celebrated as a cradle of art, fashion, and literature, a place where creativity flourished under lantern light. This tension reflects the very nature of Yoshiwara itself, a paradox of beauty and suffering, freedom and confinement. Today, traces of the districts survive in Tokyo's neighborhoods, in museums, in prints, and in festivals. But perhaps Yoshiwara's true legacy lies in the way it embodied the fleeting, bittersweet beauty of life itself. Like cherry blossoms falling at their peak, Yoshiwara dazzled precisely because it could not last. In memory and myth, it remains Japan's most famous dream of desire, a city that floated above reality and yet defined.